In this video, I'm going to give you some pointers on how to solve geometry proofs, because I know proofs can be very difficult for students, and there are some different tricks you can use that we're about to show you. So we're not going to go through an actual proof per se, but what we're going to do is just kind of give you some different tips on how you can solve geometry proofs. So one major tip is going to be use given information. So it sounds maybe pretty straightforward, but a lot of students don't quite understand how to do this. So when I say use given information, what I mean by that is, for example, let's say you were told that, let's draw a picture here. Let's say this angle, we'll call it A, B, C. So let's say this angle is being bisected by, let's call this ray BD. Alright, so if I said that angle ABC is bisected, so it's bisected, bisected, there we go, ECTED, bisected by ray BD. If that's your given information, right away, without even looking at where you're trying to end up in the proof, you can automatically just use your given information to create a next statement. Okay, so typically what you're looking for specifically is going to be a term. So in this statement right here, the only term given really is the term bisect. So in this case, when it says bisect, if you know your definitions, and again, your definitions will be crucial to doing proofs. If you don't understand the definitions, there's no way you're going to be able to get the proofs correct. Because here when it says it's being bisected, what this means is that we have that this ray is cutting the angle in half, or in other words, we have congruent segments, or congruent angles, sorry. So ABD and DBC are the same. So my next statement could be angle ABD is congruent to angle DBC. So that is without even looking at the proof that we're trying to accomplish. All we're doing is we're just taking this first statement. So the second statement, or even sometimes third statement or whatever, can be pretty straightforward because all you're doing is looking at terms from the given information. So whether that be the word bisect, maybe it could be the term perpendicular. So I mean, if it said, let's call this A, B, C, D. So let's say here in this example that angle, let's say AC, so line AC is perpendicular to ray BD. And we'll assume these go on forever in these directions. Alright, so if this is the given information, if this is a given statement, I can automatically, without even looking at the rest of the proof, come up with another statement from this, because when it says that something is perpendicular, two things we know. One is that we have 90-degree angles. So that could be a statement that we could use. We can say angle ABD equals 90 and measure of angle DBC is 90. Alright, you could put that in there if you want. So the measure of ABD equals 90. And in the same statement you can say that angle DBC is 90 as well. So the reason would be the same as your definition of perpendicular. Alright, and another thing we could have said from the same statement is we can just automatically conclude that ABD, so angle ABD, is congruent to angle DBC. Alright, because if they're both 90, then they're going to be the same measure, right? We can derive all that just from the fact that it's perpendicular. So, as you see, there's nothing specifically we're trying to prove, and we don't have to know where we're trying to end up to get these different statements. So yes, you want to, eventually look at the rest of the proof as a whole, but what I'm trying to show you is the fact that just from one statement, from the given information, from the definitions given in that given statement, you can have automatically different statements for steps 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. Alright, because we have our definitions. Alright, so this is going to be a huge a huge factor, a huge method to come up with other statements. And this is something that may be kind of self-explanatory, but a lot of students are not aware or not sure on how to use the given information. Okay, now in the context of working with congruent triangles, so in the chapter dealing with congruent triangles, there are some other specific tips we can use specific to that chapter. So when you're dealing with congruent triangles, okay, we had different ways to show congruent triangles, right? We had side, 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 angle, side. We had angle, side, angle. We also had angle, angle, side. And then for right triangles, we had hypotenuse, leg. All right, so we need to know how to use this, like how to, or what these mean. All right, so be able to identify a particular method. So like, for example, if I had two triangles like this and we had this information, so yeah, this picture, you need to be able to tell right away that these are congruent because of side, side, side. We have three sides congruent. Okay, so assuming that we know that, if we know this to be true, and in the proof, for example, let's say we're trying to prove these two triangles are congruent. So we're trying to prove that just any two triangles are congruent. And let's say in the proof, let's say maybe in somewhere, maybe given information, or you've already proven somewhere, let's say we had, angle ABC congruent to angle DEF, and let's say you had angle, I don't know, we're just making up stuff, FGH is congruent to angle IJK. So let's say this was given in the proof. So this was already somewhere in the proof. So assuming we already have these statements in here, okay, if we're trying to prove two triangles are congruent, okay, these are the only methods we have. And so in the proof itself, we need to show that we have three of these things the same. So for example, like right here, this first statement, this is an angle. These are two angles that are congruent, right? The second statement is another angle that is congruent. So without even having any context at all, we just know we're trying to prove two triangles are congruent. I can tell you right away that what we're looking for to prove congruent triangles has to be some other side. It's got to be a side congruent to another side, because it cannot be this right here. Okay, side, side, side requires three sides. We don't have any sides given to us. We have two angles. So which methods use two angles? Well, not this one. We're looking at either angle, side, angle, or angle, angle, side. Either way, we have a side somewhere in there. So we can, without even knowing context at all, just by looking and using logic, we can conclude that one statement somewhere in the proof, to show congruent triangles, we need a side congruent to another side somewhere in the proof. So that specific side that's congruent, it depends on the picture and the information given, but we know somewhere in the proof there must be another side. All right, so that's a little trick you can use as well. All right, so you can kind of use process of elimination. All right, so in the proof you need to have three things congruent to three other things to be able to use one of these methods. Unless you're dealing with right triangles, then here, hypotenuse and leg, we only need two things. But typically it's going to be one of these first four. All right, and then one last thing is, again, dealing with congruent triangles. So this is specific to the chapter on congruent triangles. If you have like a triangle inside of a triangle, so there's a lesson where you have to perform a proof by using more than one pair of congruent triangles. Okay, if that's the case, if you're trying to prove using more than one pair of congruent triangles, a key component, a key thing we're going to use is going to be the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. This is going to help you for those types of proofs. Okay, so for example, just kind of making up stuff here. So let's have a triangle and then a triangle inside. So we have two small triangles and a big triangle. Here, let's draw the same kind of picture. All right, so So the big idea here is, let's say we're trying to show that, right here, AD is congruent to CF. So we're trying to prove that. So prove AD is congruent to CF. Okay, so here we're not trying to prove congruent triangles, we're trying to prove a certain segment is the same. Okay, and I guess anytime really when you have segments or angles or something you're trying to prove congruent in the context of triangles, what you want to do first is you want to prove congruent triangles. So prove congruent triangles, and from there, once you have congruent triangles, we know the corresponding parts are the same, and that's going to help us get that information. Now here in this particular example, CAD and CF, this is part of one of the smaller triangles on the inside. So you might have to do this process twice. So you might have to prove that the large triangles are congruent first. Prove congruent large triangles. So prove the large triangles are congruent, and then do CPCTC, and then do it again to work your way to the inside of the big triangle, like right here, the AD and CF. So if you can prove the small triangles are congruent, you can then again use the fact that the corresponding parts of those congruent triangles are congruent. So I guess if you want to summarize this whole slide right here, basically you can prove congruent triangles to verify the corresponding parts are the same. So you might have to do it twice. You might have to prove it with the large triangle and then again with the small triangle, but it's really the same idea. You can prove congruent segments or angles once you have congruent triangles. So it's kind of one extra step from what we showed in the last slide with proving congruent triangles. So again, every proof is going to be different. There's not like one set way to always do something, but hopefully these kind of three ideas will help you just in general with proofs. So to summarize again, use given information. Okay, so specifically definitions or even like symbols that refer to a definition. So use that to come up with other statements. The other thing is use the congruent triangles. To prove congruent triangles, you have to have like three sides or two angles and a side. Make sure that's somewhere in the proof. All right, so if it's not in the proof, make sure it's somewhere in there, and if it's not in there, you know it's got to be put in there somewhere, so that's kind of a clue to use that. And then lastly here, we can use the fact that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And I guess now that I think of it, there's maybe one last quick thing we could explain that might be helpful as well. There's times when it might be helpful to kind of think backwards as well. So if you know where you need to end up, you might know the separate before it, and we can kind of use that to fill in some blanks. So one quick specific example is, let's say we had this picture, and let's say we're trying to prove that AD, so prove that AD is parallel, so segment AD is parallel to segment BC. So let's say this is what you're trying to prove. We know that's going to have to be our last statement in the proof, right? AD is parallel to BC. That's our last statement. But we know to prove parallel lines, based off a previous chapter, we need to verify or show that either corresponding angles are congruent, alternate interior angles are congruent, or the same side interior angles are supplementary. So typically speaking though, we're going to have to show congruent angles. So we know the separate before this is going to have to be congruent angles of some sort. And more specifically, again, we know that alternate interior angles, if those are congruent, then we would have parallel lines. So we know, we can kind of assume that it's going to be alternate interior based off this picture. That could be different with other pictures. But if we can verify that this angle is congruent to this angle, if we have that, then we have parallel lines. So without giving any other context other than the fact you're trying to prove parallel lines, we can almost automatically conclude that somewhere in the proof, to verify this, we need to show somewhere that angle BAC is congruent to angle DCA. We know it's got to be somewhere in there, and we can use some given information to do that. In this particular example, you're probably going to have to show congruent triangles, because once you have congruent triangles, so some triangles congruent to another triangle, because once you have that, the corresponding parts are the same. So again, I'm not even giving any context really to this picture or to what we're trying to prove, or to the given information, but we can kind of work backwards, and you can derive all of this just from the fact we're trying to prove parallel lines. We know that we need congruent angles, and to get congruent angles in the context of triangles, we're going to need to show corresponding parts are the same, but to do that we need congruent triangles before that. Before that we are going to need some sort of angles or segments congruent. Alright, so, and again, it depends on the context of the picture that's given to you, but working backwards can sometimes help as well. So hopefully this video is helpful. Hopefully it gives you some ideas on how to attack different proofs. And this is not a cure-all. It's still going to take practice. Every proof is going to be a little bit different, but here's some tips to help you out.